Welcome to part 2 of the Unreal BootCamp lesson on combining brainCloud requests via Cloud Code script. This is the second of a two-part lesson that will use a post-hook Cloud Code script to combine all the brainCloud requests that the example game makes on a successful authentication request. Run the game. Once authenticated, stop the game. In the output window, notice that the reconnect request contains all the data that we included in the post-hook script that we wrote in the previous lesson. In this lesson, we're going to parse this data and remove the subsequent unnecessary brainCloud requests that occur after a successful authentication request. In the network callback.h file, we are going to declare a struct called authentication data to hold all the data that we receive on a successful authentication response. This struct declares public member variables for the main, daily, and country leaderboard pointers, a vector for the user statistics, a vector for the level data, a vector for the achievements, and a pointer to the user data object. We'll then declare a public default constructor to initialize the pointers to null, and a public destructor to clean up the dynamic memory allocations when we are done with the authentication data object. Modify the authentication request completed callback method to take in a pointer to the authentication data as the parameter. Navigate to the network manager.h file. Scroll down and declare 5 private methods that will be used to parse the response data. Navigate to the network manager.cbp file. Scroll down to the bottom. Implement the parse leaderboard method. In the body, get the leaderboard array from the JSON data. Declare a T-array of leaderboard entry objects, along with a few local variables. Loop through all the elements in the leaderboard array and parse the rank, nickname, and score. The score will then be converted to seconds and stored as a float. And place the nickname, rank, and time onto the leaderboard entries T-array to create a leaderboard entry object. Once all the leaderboard entries have been parsed, parse the leaderboard ID, dereference the leaderboard pointer, and dynamically create a leaderboard object, passing in the leaderboard ID and the list of leaderboard entries as the arguments. Implement the parse statistics method. In the body, declare a vector of statistic objects along with a few local variables. Then loop through all the elements in the statistics JSON array. Using the key, get the description. Then parse the value. Create a statistic object, passing in the name, description, and value as the arguments. Push the object onto the statistics vector. Once all the statistic objects have been parsed, return the statistics vector. Implement the parse level data method. Get the entity list array from the JSON data. Declare a vector of level data objects along with a few local variables. Loop through all the elements in the entity list array and parse level data, the entity type, the entity ID, and the index. Create a level data object, passing in the entity type, entity ID, index, and the level data as the arguments. Push the level data object onto the level data vector. Once all the level data objects have been parsed, return the level data vector. Implement the parse achievements method. Declare a vector of achievement objects along with a few local variables. Then loop through all the elements in the achievements JSON array. Parse the ID, title, description, and status. Create an achievement object, passing in the ID, title, description, and status as the arguments. Push the object onto the achievements vector. Once all the achievement objects have been parsed, return the achievements vector. Implement the parse user progress method. Parse the entity ID, the entity type, and the entity JSON data. Dereference the user data pointer and create a user data object passing in the entity ID, entity type, and the entity JSON data as the arguments. Scroll up and find the onAuthentication callback method. Declare a local variable of type authentication data. In the callback's onAuthenticationRequestCompleted method, pass in the address of the authentication data object. Create a JSON reader using the JSON response data. Then declare a JSON object and using the JSON reader, deserialize the JSON data. If the JSON data was deserialized successfully, we can now start to parse the data. Create a JSON data object called root. From the root object, parse the statistics JSON data. Invoke the parse statistics method. Pass in the statistics JSON data. Store the result in the authentication data statistics vector. Check to see if the root object contains a key for leaderboards. If it does, get the leaderboards JSON object from the root JSON object. Check to see if the leaderboards JSON object contains a key for main. If it does, get the main leaderboard JSON data from the leaderboards JSON object. Invoke the parse leaderboard method. Pass in the address of the authentication data's main leaderboard pointer and the main leaderboard JSON data as the arguments. Next, check to see if the leaderboards JSON object contains a key for daily. If it does, get the daily leaderboard JSON data from the leaderboards JSON object. Invoke the parse leaderboard method, passing in the address of the authentication data's daily leaderboard pointer and the daily leaderboard JSON data as the arguments. Finally, check to see if the leaderboard's JSON object contains a key for country. If it does, get the country leaderboard JSON data from the leaderboard's JSON object. Invoke the parse leaderboard method, passing in the address of the authentication data's country leaderboard pointer and the country leaderboard JSON data as the arguments. Check to see if the root object contains a key for level data. If it does, get the level data object from the root JSON object. Invoke the parse level data method, passing in the level data JSON data. Store the result in the authentication data's level data vector. Check to see if the root object contains a key for achievements. If it does, get the achievements JSON array from the root JSON object. Invoke the parse achievements method, pass in the achievements JSON array, store the result in the authentication data's achievements vector. Check to see if the root object contains a key for user progress. If it does, get the user progress JSON object from the root JSON object. Invoke the parse user progress method, passing in the address of the authentication data's user data pointer and the user progress JSON data as the arguments. Finally, check to see if the root object contains a key for identities. If it does, get the identities JSON array from the root object. Clear the mIdentityTypes list member variable. Then loop through the identities array and add each element's key to the mIdentityTypes list member variable. Navigate to the spaceshooter game mode base.h file. Scroll down and find the onAuthenticationRequestCompleted method. Modify the parameter list to take in a pointer to the authentication data object. Navigate to the spaceshooter game mode base.cbp file. Scroll down and find the onAuthenticationRequestCompleted method. Modify the parameter list to take in a pointer to the authentication data object. Delete all the network requests. Then hide the connecting dialog and show the main menu. Safety check the authentication data's level data vector to ensure it contains at least one element. If it does, get the level data vector and pass it into the spawner's setLevelData method. Then loop through all the level data's elements and set each level's duration and description. In the event that the authentication data's level data vector does not contain any elements, invoke the network manager's request global entity level data method. Safety check that the authentication data's main leaderboard pointer is not null. If it isn't null, invoke the leaderboard's manager's add leaderboard method, dereferencing the authentication data's main leaderboard pointer to pass in the object as the argument. In the event that the authentication data's main leaderboard pointer is null, invoke the network manager's request leaderboard method, passing in the main leaderboard ID constant. Safety check that the authentication data's daily leaderboard pointer isn't null. If it isn't null, invoke the leaderboard's manager's add leaderboard method, dereference the authentication data's daily leaderboard pointer to pass in the object as the argument. In the event that the authentication data's daily leaderboard pointer is null, invoke the network manager's request leaderboard method, passing in the daily leaderboard ID constant. Safety check that the authentication data's country leaderboard pointer isn't null. If it isn't null, invoke the leaderboard manager's add leaderboard method, dereference the authentication data's country leaderboard pointer to pass in the object as the argument. In the event that the authentication data's country leaderboard pointer is null, invoke the network manager's request country leaderboard method. Safety check that the authentication data's statistics vector contains at least one element. If it does, get the statistics vector and pass it into the statistics manager's setStatistics method. In the event that the authentication data's statistics vector does not contain any elements, invoke the network manager's request user statistics method. Safety check that the authentication data's achievements vector contains at least one element. If it does, get the achievements vector and pass it into the achievements manager's setAchievements method. In the event that the authentication data's achievements vector does not contain any elements, invoke the network manager's request achievements method. Safety check that the authentication data's user data pointer is not null. If it isn't null, dereference the authentication data's user data pointer and use the object to create a new user data object and assign it to the muserData member variable. In the event that the authentication data's user data pointer is null, invoke the network manager's request user entity data method. Click the Run button to build the project and launch the Unreal editor. Once the Unreal editor opens, run the game. Click the brainCloud button, then click Leaderboards. As you can see, the leaderboards data was properly parsed and set to the corresponding Leaderboards tab. Close the dialog and check the Statistics dialog. The statistics data was properly parsed and set. Close the dialog and check the Achievements dialog. And as you can see, the Achievements data was properly parsed and set as well. This concludes our lesson on combining brainCloud requests using a Cloud Code script. I hope these two lessons were able to demonstrate the countless possibilities that Cloud Code scripting can provide. From all of us on the brainCloud team, thank you for watching the Unreal BootCamp.